Two strangers walked into a bar, and they walked out with their own radio show.
I've never been with a man before.
Looks like I'm the boss now.
He's Derek.
The world is your oyster. Just shit on it.
She's Romaine.
I've got a handful of shit.
It's Derek and Romaine.
2.0, bitches. Hey, Derek.
Listen to how tuneful you are today. Is
I'm
it
in a
because
good
our
mood.
guest is going to be talking tunes and things, or you're just in a happy mood?
I mean, a little bit of both, I think. Got a beautiful girl joining us on the show in a few minutes.
Well, that's why.
We're going to be talking about Broadway. So, yeah, I'm just in a good sing-songy mood, I guess.
Okay.
I don't
Look,
know.
I'm here for it.
It's nice.
I like it when you're in a good mood.
Thank you. Thank you. I like it when I'm in a good mood, too. It's so much better than when I'm in a bad, grumpy mood, which happens plenty, trust me.
I know. I think the listeners prefer it when I'm in a bad mood because I'm funnier. But why I prefer personally to be in a good mood.
I actually think you are right. I do think they prefer you in a bad mood, which, by the way, doesn't make a lot of sense to me. But, whatever. Teach their own, I guess. Teach their own.
It's hard to be angry for 21 years straight, but I'm doing my best.
I mean, I appreciate that about you. I do. Anyway.
But like you, Romaine, I do enjoy Broadway. Both of us grew up far away from the lights of Broadway, but we saw touring shows and the Tonys on TV, and now we get to live close enough to actually attend a variety of Broadway shows. And we have a big cruise coming up this fall to Bermuda that's sailing out of New York City. And a bunch of people who are joining us on the cruise are going to be coming to New York before we sail.
Right.
But they're not the only ones. People love to do trips to New York in the fall or around Christmas time. The city is beautiful. How the stores are all decorated, what's left of them, on Fifth Avenue. And that's really pretty. And as long as you come not too late in the season, the city is not too cold and horrible. I always say the best weekend to come to New York is the first weekend after the weekend of Thanksgiving.
Oh, interesting.
So
okay.
Not the Saturday, Sunday after Thanksgiving, Black
but the
Friday.
one after that.
The one after that, because it's a little early in the tourist season, because most people who come for Christmas and everything come closer to actually Christmas and New Year's. And a lot of people blew their travel wad Thanksgiving weekend. So it's a little bit of a slow weekend.
Okay.
But everything is decorated, and also you're more likely to get better weather. It's amazing how 1 week can make a difference in temperature. Yeah. So, that's my advice. If you're not going on the cruise with us, but you do want to come to New York and see, the Christmas tree at Rockefeller Center and all that kind of stuff, that's the weekend to come to New York. That
is a solid recommendation, Derek. I actually agree with that recommendation because it is a good time of year. The city is starting to become beautiful for the holidays, and you're right. It's just before all of the crazy comes to town. So I actually think that's a great weekend to do it. Yeah.
But a lot of people, when they come to New York, they want to see Broadway shows.
Yes.
Why we want to have Laura Heywood join us, Broadway Girl NYC. Mm-hmm. She really knows her stuff when it comes to Broadway.
I'm always surprised at how she has transitioned in her career. Because, when we first met her, she was working for Maxim magazine radio show over, their whole network over at Sirius XM. And she was like a producer for the Maxim channel.
Right.
And now she's basically a Broadway connoisseur and expert. And, we've kind of watched this transition happen over the last 20-some years. And it's pretty remarkable, actually, to see how much she's changed and what she's done with her career.
Broadway, baby.
Broadway is an enticing proposition, and I can see why people fall in love. There's a lot there to love, from the fact that the shows are always changing and something new is always on the horizon. There's a lot there. There's a lot there in Broadway to love. So it doesn't surprise me that she fell so madly in love with it.
And it is an actually genuinely exciting time on Broadway because there's a good mix of shows. currently playing and then coming up. And a lot of it is, crowd pleasing stuff. But Broadway is also exploring a lot of new things, LGBTQ issues, race, in new ways. And that's nice to see too. But sometimes people just want to go and see a tuneful show, a classic revival on Broadway, and just, enjoy themselves. But the hottest thing more recently on Broadway has been plays, short-run plays with big stars. And part of it is they are less expensive to put on. And if you get a big star like Denzel Washington, who is going to be coming up on Broadway, people will come. And he's not going to commit to a really long run, but it doesn't cost a lot to put the show up, and he will pack the house. He's a terrific actor, and he's done Broadway a bunch of times. And so, in the recent past, the push has been musicals because most people from out of town, they want to go and see a musical. But
who doesn't
more recently,
love a big Broadway musical, Derek?
Well, it is. Big and splashy and fun. The problem is they are expensive. They're expensive to put on, and then they're expensive to run because, you got an orchestra and a big cast, and all that costs dollars, $4 signs.
Yeah.
But a play, we'll have the crew and everything, but it doesn't have an orchestra, and the cast is usually, under 8 people, and the economics of it are a little bit better.
Yeah, that makes sense. I never thought about it from that perspective, but yeah, that totally makes sense.
But there are some musicals that are coming this fall. There's actually a bunch of shows that are coming this fall that people are excited about.
Yeah. So obviously, you and I have talked about Cola Scola's show, Oh Mary, which I'm going to be going to see in August. I don't know if I've even told you about that, but I'm going to go see that in August. And I'm excited to see that show. And then another show that I'm interested in, and part of why I'm interested in it is because of who's starring in it. So there is a show that is opening on September 30th called McNeil. And it is Robert Downey Jr.'s Broadway debut, which I did not know that he had never been on Broadway before. He's the kind of star that I would have imagined had been on Broadway several times.
Well, he's been in movies a lot. And then, he had his drug problem, and then he was in prison. And then I think he was really focused on rebuilding his movie career in the early 2000s. And then once Iron Man happened, he was pretty busy just being Iron Man. Yeah. But he is a very well-respected actor. He won the Oscar earlier this year. And I think this is a smart choice for him because I think it will be good for audiences to see him in a different way. And I think as an actor, he likes to do more serious or challenging work, and the studios are not making that as movies anymore.
Right.
Because they're not making the sort of mid-budget dramas that a lot of actors have made as their sort of bread and butter as like being serious actors. And Broadway is a good opportunity. But not all actors like being in front of audiences, live audiences. But maybe, I think there's going to be a lot of love in the house for him because especially since the Iron Man days, the fans are there. Right. And I think that they'll be really, I think he'll get a lot of audience love. I mean, we'll see if he gets Tony love, but I think the audience will show up for him.
I agree. But we'll see, I guess. Yeah. I don't know. What shows are you excited about?
Well, I am excited about the Death Becomes Her musical that has been playing in Chicago that is coming to Broadway this fall. Our friend Christopher Sieber is in it, playing Ernest. And all the gays who went to see it in Chicago loved it, said it was a great time, fun songs, a lot of laughs. The show knows what it is.
I love that. I love that it knows what it is.
Yeah.
Because it's campy and ridiculous and fun and stupid and all of those things. So I like that. I like that they have not lost sight of that in making this into a Broadway musical.
Yeah. And they are doing a short run of Once Upon a Mattress with Sutton Foster and Michael Urie. And I saw that show with the revival that Sarah Jessica Parker was in.
Interesting. Okay. What is that show about?
Somewhere about 20 years. It's The Princess and the Pea.
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
But it's a musical version of The Princess and the Pea. And it's actually really fun. I feel like, the gays are going to get mad at me if I get this wrong. I feel like Carol Burnett originated this role on Broadway. And this was like a star-making role for her. And it's a sweet show. I mean, it's from the 1950s. So it's a sweet show. It's fun. And it has good sort of songs and light comedy and that kind of thing. It's a fun show.
Right.
It's the kind of Broadway comfort food that people enjoy.
Right.
You know, you come out, you spend 2 hours in the theater, and you come out happy on the other side. And I think that people like that. But it's a show that has been revived before, and they are only doing a short run, and that will actually probably be fine. You know, it'll run from, I think, a bit into the summer, into the fall. But I think that will be fun. And then I am curious about this. They are putting together a new musical that'll be playing next year at the Kennedy Center in D.C., and I'm sure they have hopes of bringing it to New York, but they're doing a musical version of the Apple TV show Schmigadoon.
I don't know that I've ever seen Schmigadoon.
It is it's a sort of a musical parody of Brigadoon.
Okay.
It's basically a couple that are sort of at odds. They go on vacation. I don't remember. The first season was 3 years ago. So I only vaguely remember the plot. But I feel like a couple is on vacation at like a bed and breakfast somewhere. And they take a walk across like a magical bridge, and they end up in a magical land that they get trapped in called Schmigadoon, where everyone is sort of living in a musical and singing. And the show is actually really fun.
Okay.
And there are lots of tunes in it and everything. But it was a series, like a limited run series, because it was 6 or 8 episodes or something, right? And they did 2 seasons of it. And I would imagine that the stage version of it will sort of pare down some of the plot and, narrow some of the songs. But it was actually a really fun, it was a fun show, and people really liked it. And, I do think it is the kind of thing that might do well in a Broadway adaptation, because it really is just, it's already a TV show musical. Like, they already worked out the plot and they already have the songs.
Right.
So they really just need to figure out, how do we squeeze this into a 2-hour show? And that shouldn't be that hard.
Yeah.
So it could be good.
Okay. Interesting. I like that. All right.
Yeah.
Well, I wish I'd seen the TV show, because then I could probably like it more. But, I'm open to new things. I'm open to
You still can,
shows.
with
That's true. I
streaming,
could watch it beforehand, I suppose.
And things live forever, and they never die. They
It's
never go
true,
away.
it's
Just like
true.
Derek and Romaine.
Oh, just like
Goes
us.
on and on forever.
Forever and ever. We'll never go away.
No, we will not, except for a brief moment before we talk to Laura Heywood, Broadway Girl NYC.
Stay tuned for more Derek and Romaine.
Derek here, along with Romaine, and joining us by popular demand, Laura Heywood is with us. You know her, of course, as Broadway Girl NYC. And you can find her there on Instagram and Facebook and YouTube as Broadway Girl NYC. And, of course, on the web at lauraheywoodmedia.com. Laura, it is an absolute delight to have you back with us.
I have missed you guys. I've been thinking about you. We are coming up on our 20-year friend anniversary.
That's crazy.
The 3 of us.
That is crazy to me.
And I know it's crazy to me too, especially since we're all only 35.
Yeah.
Well, at least. Possibly less.
But yeah, like you were, I think basically literally, you were my first friends in New York when I moved here.
Wow, that's wild. That's
That
wild
is
to think
wild.
about.
Yeah.
And look, we've
Yeah,
maintained
so
this
it's
friendship.
very good to reconnect. And who can say that?
Right.
Who can say they've been friends, especially with me, for 20 years? Congratulations.
Well, it is just very funny with it because, we have been doing our show for 21 years, which is a psychotic length of time for literally anything. Like my mom would say, that's a long
Even
time to do
marriages.
something, even if it's fun.
Right.
But yeah, it has been a long time. But we, we'll interview interns now. And they were born after our show started.
Yeah, it's crazy.
It's upsetting.
That wild. I remember I knew that I had sort of gone into a different generation when one of the leads at Hamilton was like, oh my gosh, when I was in second grade, I used to watch your interviews on YouTube. And I was like, wait, what? I'm like, but you're a grown up. And they're like, yeah, I'm 20.
Oh, yeah, that's brutal. We've been in the game a long time, Laura.
Listen, we're veterans. We are experienced professionals.
We are.
That's not anything to be embarrassed about.
Absolutely not.
We have a lot of wisdom and experience. We've seen
And we're all
a
just
lot.
as sexy as we were back then.
Oh, yeah.
Possibly even sexier. I mean, we won't put an online poll about it, but let's just say it's true and move on.
I will say that Romaine's first name for me on air was wasn't it like
it was Hot Laura?
Producer Laura or something?
Yeah. Yeah, it's always been Hot Laura. I don't think that's ever changed.
Yeah.
No matter what HR
I'll
said.
be going by that into my 80s, so
Yeah, as you should, frankly.
I'll take it.
That'll be the New
Anyway,
York
Romaine,
Times obituary. Hot Laura dies at 150. Yes.
Hotter than ever.
Yeah.
Romaine, I saw a picture of Romy, and where did this adult come from?
Yeah, my daughter has grown old. Yeah, she's getting her first job, and she's working as a lifeguard this summer so that she can get a summer tan. She's driving me crazy. So it's a lot. We have one more year of high school left before she graduates high school. It went by much quicker than I could have ever imagined. Ever.
Well, I was at that baby shower. So
Yeah.
that's how long it's been. When you need to be reminded.
Oh man.
Wow.
Yeah. It's been a long time. Long time.
Yes. But Laura,
right, what
I
should
am
we
glad
discuss
to have
today?
you back with us because it has been quite some time since
Yeah.
we have had somebody who actually knows what's happening in the world of Broadway talking to us about the world of Broadway.
Well, I'm happy to be here. Happy to do it.
Now, we just had the Tony Awards not that long ago. And, obviously with the Tony Awards, there's a lot of lead into it and excitement. And then after the Tony Awards, there's a lot of sadness, I feel like, as shows start closing and things like that. So let's start with the Tony Awards, I think, since they just took place. What were your thoughts on this year's Tony Awards, winners, losers, and all that jazz?
I felt like it hit pretty well. I was pleased with all of the winners. I think that there were some shows that got shut out of nominations that bummed me out, but it was a huge packed season and not everyone who was awards worthy could get nominated. And of course, I believe that basically if you're good enough to get nominated, you're good enough to win. And it's just kind of a question of, who else is out there that season, that particular season. But I really felt that there was a great balance of acknowledgments. Like Outsiders won for Best Musical, but that was one of the only awards that it won. Sometimes one show will sweep book, score, actor, actress, featured performers. But this time, Outsiders won in the big category, Best Musical. Stereophonic won for Best Play. It is a play with a lot of music in it. but it is a play. And then Hell's Kitchen got 2 acting wins, and Stuff had 2 really important wins, especially when taken together, Book of the Musical and Score. And so I feel like a lot of the shows that were represented are coming out feeling like the big winners as opposed to one big winner. That always makes me happy because, of course, I want everybody to feel like a winner.
Well, that's because you know everybody. I mean, I don't even know. For me, it would be so hard to be you during Tony seasons because I know that you have all the friends and all the shows. I know you go to certain shows dozens of times.
Yeah.
I mean, you really
Yeah,
do
it's a hard
love.
life.
You really do love this world of Broadway. I can't even imagine. How do you even It's got to be so hard when all your friends are competing against each other.
Well, in a sense that's true, but in another sense, I don't have to choose.
Right.
I'm not a voter. I'm not a nominator. So all I have to do is love on them as hard as I can, and that is useful in times of great success and in times of of sadness. So
Sure.
It's not that hard. It's better than having a whole bunch of people you hate.
That
I'd
is
rather
true.
genuinely love everyone, because the fact is, this is a little bit woo woo, but I like getting a little bit woo woo. When you have a lot of love in your heart, your love is projected towards people, but it's really inside your own body. And I think it's good for me. I think it's good for my health to feel love for other people. I think that, negative feelings can be poisonous and positive
Absolutely.
feelings can be healing. And it doesn't have to be love for yourself. It can be love for other people. So no, that does not make it hard to be me.
Yeah, I
It'd
think
be
that
hard
what's
if I had to choose between them.
Right.
Yeah. But this is what I think is really amazing about the Tony Awards. And we've talked about this on our show a lot for people who are not in New York a lot and don't go to a lot of live theater. They don't really have a sense of just the level of talent that is required to be a performer on Broadway. And so to your point about usually it's like, oh, well, just being nominated is an honor. But the reality is there are hugely talented people who do not even get nominated. It is incredibly competitive just because the people are so insanely talented. And then you see clips from the live performances from the various shows, and you really get to see, everybody here is really a lot more talented than anybody I've ever met in person. And, so it does make it hard to choose. But I agree with you. I liked the mix of winners this year. There were people who have been on Broadway for 40 years who won. There were people where this was their first Broadway show and they won. And it was a mix of awards across different shows. It was great.
The combination, like you mentioned, people making their Broadway debuts and people who are doing it for 40 years. That actually happened for the same show.
Right.
Lisa Lewis, who won for Best Featured Performer in Hell's Kitchen, won after 40 years. She was in Dreamgirls in the 80s, to give some context. And then her co-star, the lead of Hell's Kitchen, is, I don't know her exact age, but I want to say she's 20 or younger. And this is her Broadway debut, and she won for Best Leading Performer. And, the fact that both are possible, these are colleagues, but one has also been doing it for so long. There are breakout stars at every point in a career. And that's one of the things that I love most about Broadway as well. I think in Hollywood in particular, and, of course on Broadway too, youth is commodified. But there have been a few winners over the last few years who have won in their 50s, 60s, 70s and been like, I stopped dreaming of this 30 years ago and have just been doing the work. And I love seeing when the work really pays off. Yeah.
Well, and you can also tell in the house that how much respect, because, the Tony Awards, the audience is filled with the people, the professionals who work on Broadway. And you can tell how they feel about how talented the other people are. It is really interesting how much respect the performers have. There isn't a lot of necessarily jealousy and animosity. People are just, they're just so surrounded by talent so often, and you can really tell who they are themselves fans of and their work. And, when a lot of young people, like Jonathan Groff talked about watching the Tonys at home as a kid and dreaming of coming to New York. And, when you have somebody who has been on Broadway for 30, 40 years and then they win a Tony, the audience is filled with people who were kids at home watching the Tonys who have followed their career almost their entire life. And so you can really feel it in the response from everybody there.
It certainly is something you can only do if you work really hard. There's no faking it on Broadway. In fact,
right.
One of my favorite moments in the show actually had less to do with the content and more to do with, it was when Ariana DeBose finished her opening number and was totally out of breath delivering her next few lines. And I was like, what a perfect reminder. It wasn't about what she was saying. And what she was saying was, I'm sure, brilliant. And the opening number was gorgeous. But I loved that she went straight into talking on a live mic after she had just done an Olympic level feat of athleticism while singing on key. It is a good reminder because sometimes these folks look so superhuman in what they accomplish that we forget that we're not watching special effects. We forget that they didn't have 25 takes to do it. It's live. It's right in front of you. And yeah, they're out of breath. That shit's hard.
Yeah, it sure is. Whew. I don't know how they do it, honestly.
Do it.
So
I have a hard time just sitting in the audience 8 times a week, and then here they are. They really are athletes.
Yeah.
Athletes who can sing, dance, and look gorgeous.
Yeah, it really is. It really is something. I mean, and I think it's. I know it's tough when people are coming to New York and like, well, you hear about all these shows and. Should I really, which one should I go to and whatever? And I actually think, well, first of all, almost any show that runs on Broadway for more than 6 weeks is great. It's very hard to get a show mounted and then to keep a show open and keep people coming. So, generally speaking, unless it's in previews or it just opened yesterday, you're probably in good hands if the show has been playing for 6 months or something. But I think people should just sort of look at the, description of the show. And if it speaks to you or it sounds interesting, you just take the leap and go because lots of shows are just very different and you never know what you're going to get.
There are also so many ways to get inexpensive or less expensive tickets now than there used to be. There are a lot of different apps now that will allow, especially if you have some flexibility, especially day of tickets. You can go to the TKTS booth, the half-price ticket booth in Times Square. That's been around for 30 years. But you can also, almost every single show offers a lottery or a rush option, which back in the day, like when Rent basically invented the rush policy, you had to stay up all night, line up. Only the first few people in line could get tickets. But now you can do it online for almost every show. I usually will Google Broadway rush policies, and there will be an article on Playbill or Broadway World that has a breakdown of every single show's policy. But, you can get tickets for $50 or less day of and sometimes further in advance. Hamilton does their online lottery a few weeks ahead or a couple weeks ahead so that people can actually travel in from out of town if they win.
Oh, that's awesome.
And then there's also my new obsession, and I have no affiliation with them except as a user, but there's a new app called Theater without an E. It's THEATR. And it is a peer-to-peer selling site where the rule is you have to sell tickets for at face value or below. And you can set as a buyer, you can set alerts for the shows you want to see and how much you're willing to pay. And it'll ding you. They'll give you a little alert when one of your shows at your price point pops up. And I have gotten tickets for $10, like 15 minutes before curtain, because I had my phone in my hand. Somebody realized their friend wasn't going to make it, and they just didn't want the ticket to go to waste. It reminds me of back when the internet was like used mostly for good and wasn't based on algorithms and AI.
Right.
It's just a bunch of theater people who want to, create community and make sure tickets don't go to waste. It's not a moneymaker. And it's so good and so wholesome that I'm afraid it's not going to last.
Well, I hope it does, because it sounds awesome.
I do too, but I feel like somebody will come along and figure out how to like co-opt it or shut it down. I mean, I don't know how it's affecting sales at, other secondary ticket markets, but it right now is so lovely. And I've made friends through it. Somebody who I ended up sitting next to, who I'd gotten their ticket. I've given away +1s when I've had press tickets to stuff and didn't have someone specific to bring. I would just be like, free, come see the show. And so that's my current ticket buying obsession. And there's almost always something you can see affordably if you're willing to have an open mind about it. And that goes back to your point, Derek, that if the show is good enough to get to Broadway, it's probably worth seeing. And I also want to say that sometimes the really, really good shows don't even last 6 weeks. My favorite show of the season was Lempicka, and it closed in 6 weeks. And I saw it 8 times in those 6 weeks.
Oh, yeah. People who love that show were obsessed.
Oh, we're called Lem People. The fandom's called Lem People.
But
the
it's so
is out, and I highly recommend listening to it.
But it is so funny. Sometimes there is just no rhyme or reason of why a show clicks and that people come and buy tickets, and sometimes it doesn't. Because that was a show that I heard a lot of people loved and went. And so it wasn't like, because sometimes the show will have bad buzz. People will be like, oh, yeah, it looked promising, but then I got there and it was meh. Like, that happens all the time in New York and, in theater circles, and, you run into it, I'm sure. But like, this was a show that people were like, I love this show. And it was surprising to see a show that had such strong word of mouth where they just could not move tickets.
I think that this was a case where certain reviewers and certain outlets just have outsized power. And, you get one wrong person who doesn't like it, and it can basically close the show down. I think it's very sweet. It's very sweet that that you were like, nobody's jealous on Broadway. Everybody loves each other. I think that's very cute. Where there is a lot of politics in this business. And I think that unfortunately there are sometimes systems in place that don't necessarily want the status quo to change. That show in particular had a central queer storyline that wasn't even mentioned in any of the major reviews. And that at closing night, the director, Rachel Chapkin, made a speech about that. She was like, I was prepared to be skewered and I was prepared to be adored, but I wasn't prepared to not be seen. But it isn't clear that the mainstream press even really understood what this show was about, because they didn't even talk about that. They talked about the fact that Tamara de Lempicka was this Art Deco painter who was forgotten, but the love story is about her and her muse, Rafaela, in early 20th century Paris, falling in love on the backdrop of war and a change in the artistic landscape. And I think that if that had been talked about and appreciated along with the stellar performances, that it might have really had a different life. So it does get political. And I think that may have been the case with this particular show.
I mean, there's definitely, it's a business. It's a cutthroat business. There's a lot of money on the line. And, when I say that there's not jealous, what I mean is like, in terms of the performers and their talent, I think that there's a lot of respect.
No, I know what you mean.
among, yeah.
Do you? Because sometimes I don't.
But but also, I mean, I'm sure that there is like, I wanted that role and I didn't get that role. There's absolutely that kind of animosity for sure.
Well, and then I hear there's definitely some, like, I'm not going to give any specifics, but I know I have heard some stories of people who, like, backstage were saying things like, if I don't win this, everybody's life's going to be a living hell for the next 6 weeks or whatever. But, like, people who there is definitely, I don't know. I mean, I do think that probably more than other industries, because theater is by nature so collaborative, everybody just has to kind of live in a mindset of helping each other. But, there's bitterness for sure, especially when, an outsized influence from a critic comes into play, or, or somebody gets a part, or they're like with anything, emotions run high. I'll just say that.
But like a lot of these shows, when because Jonathan Groff talked about his start in Spring Awakening, and a lot of
Which
actors
I saw more than 30 times.
Of course you did.
But even still, like look,
that
actors
was the show
will
that changed my life.
Yeah, but in this, I'm saying that sometimes an actor will start with a show, workshopping it. Like they'll meet the writer, director, whatever. They'll in a very early stage, they'll be there in the workshopping stage, and then in an out of town or off Broadway phase, and blah, 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 and then it gets to Broadway, and sometimes you're seeing a show that is just opening on Broadway, but the people who are on that stage
have been doing it for
and behind
how
the
long?
scenes have been on it for 2 or 3 years.
Yeah.
And so
more.
for the show to then, get negative reviews or flop or whatever, it has to be devastating to pour years of your life into something and have it die, opening night.
We just went through this. It wasn't quite opening night, but Heart of Rock and Roll, the musical featuring the music of Huey Lewis and the News, just closed. And it was 8 years in development.
Oh.
And I had one pretty good friend who was involved from the very first workshop. And of course, getting to Broadway was the goal. And they got there. And then within, 2 months, maybe 10 weeks, they closed. And suddenly, 8 years is high school and college combined.
Yeah, that's
a
lot.
A huge era of somebody's life. And, even for somebody who's 40 years old, that's 20% of their life.
Yeah.
So to have to say goodbye to something, especially on such a high of Broadway, to have done the work, it's like climbing a mountain, seeing the most beautiful view of your life, and then falling off the cliff. It's heartbreaking.
Yeah, that's pretty devastating.
So, yeah, I mean, I just posted something to Instagram a few days ago that said, the worst thing you can do when somebody you love closes a show is say, "What's next for you?" You need to say, like, I hope you can get some rest right now. You made something beautiful, and I'll remember it forever. Congratulations, But people don't. Broadway is so hit and miss. And somebody like Keisha Lewis, who won the Tony for Hell's Kitchen, talked about how frequently she thought about giving up.
Right.
And when your show closes, it's not like you're, if you're a senior vice president for a finance company and you get laid off, probably you can go get another job as a senior vice president in another finance company, I'm guessing, or you've got a severance package or whatever. But that doesn't happen on Broadway. You can have had huge Broadway credits and accolades and still not know where your next check's coming from.
Oh, yeah. I mean,
it's
we all
business.
We all have friends who work in this industry, and it is absolutely brutal when a show unexpectedly closes. And see, sometimes even when you expect it, it's like, oh shit. I mean, it's a scary industry.
Yeah,
for sure. It's a lot of risk and a lot of reward.
Yes. Yeah, there can be great reward. And I think a lot of people, including myself, live in have to live with the philosophy of don't be sad that it's gone, be glad that it happened.
Yeah.
Because if you can't believe in that, then you really can't be a professional theater maker.
So here's the question I have, because Merrily We Roll Along and Stereophonic both did pretty good at the Tony Awards, and yet both of them are closing very soon. So explain to me why that happens.
Okay, well, I actually don't know the closing details for Stereophonic, but I can tell you definitely about Merrily. Merrily has been open for a year. It was one of the first new shows to open this season, and it still has its original cast, and the cast is one of the main reasons people are coming to see this show. Jonathan Groff and Daniel Radcliffe both won Tony Awards. Lindsay Mendez was nominated, and it was always meant to be a limited run show.
Gotcha.
When they opened, they said, I don't know if it was when they opened or they extended or what, but this was a show that it's not closing exactly. It's ending. It's ending at a time when, they'd always planned for it to end. And many shows are like that, especially, I think or a sign that this might be the case is if there's a big Hollywood star in it,
Sure. Because
they can't generally sign on for more than a limited run because of other commitments. Like Mary Jane with Rachel McAdams was a limited run, and Appropriate with Sarah Paulson was a limited run, which also won for Best Revival of a Play, and is closing. So that's the main reason. But another reason that shows close, even when they have great reviews and great word of mouth and press, is that the only thing that really keeps the show open is money. And if people aren't buying tickets, or they're not buying enough tickets, or if tickets aren't priced high enough, then they're not making their money back. Capitalization for a Broadway show can be in the tens of millions of dollars, and there are cases, I think, when it's been, like $100 million, and if the price, and don't quote me on that, but I feel like Spider-Man may have been up there, and to make that money back when there are also so many expenses it takes to run a show, it's hard to make enough money to even cover it's called the nut, which always makes me giggle. But the nut is the amount it costs to keep a show running and break even. And to come out ahead of that, even with ticket prices being as high as they are, is very difficult.
Wow.
Well, I also wonder, because we saw this a bit with, some other like star vehicle shows, like Hello Dolly, is that, in the past, what you wanted with a show was a situation like what happened with Phantom or Cats or Wicked, Rent, a show that, you open and it does really well, and then it sticks around for 20 years and just keeps making money. Chicago. But it does feel like, not everyone is trying to do a show that will just sit in a house for 20 years. And for whatever reason, either they don't think the show will last that long, or as a producer, they would rather like do more shows, open up the houses so they can get another show in there that they want to do, and then take that out on tour. Like there are different business models around things, and there's a finite number of theaters. So, there's only so much you can do. But like The Music Man, which was terrific. Had a great time at that. But yeah, that also was a show that, it really felt like, you could imagine a situation where a show like The Music Man, which is as solid a musical as it's ever been on Broadway, could run for 10 years, 20 years. But, why when, we just want to have Hugh Jackman and Sutton Foster and then run for a year, make a pile of money and sold out houses and then get out.
Yeah, I think that there's, I can't get in the minds of producers. I have no idea how these decisions are made, but I'm pretty sure it's a dollars and cents game. My guess is that probably, and again, totally guess, but that probably for something like Music Man, they did a bunch of market research, realized there was nobody they could get in that would match the star power of Sutton Foster and Hugh Jackman, and they would rather go out on top than spend a lot of money to keep it running for another year, because again, if week to week, costs aren't being matched, then that's money lost.
Right.
Whereas you can, cut, you can be like, all right, well now, even if they're making $10 a week beyond expenses, it's better to stop there than before you start losing $10 a week or $10 million a week.
Right.
Yeah.
A good example of this is Sweeney Todd, where they started with Josh Groban and Annalee Ashford, and they did keep the show going after they left, and they brought in Sutton Foster and Aaron Tveit, who are excellent and could have opened the show on their own star power. And that one closed, and I don't know if, I can only assume that it closed because they weren't making enough money, but it also could have closed because Sutton and Aaron's contracts were coming up to a close, and they couldn't find a third pair to bring in. I think that it is unlikely that a show closes when it is profitable, unless there's some kind of extenuating circumstance. But, if they are depending on the stars, and for a show like Sweeney Todd, you need more than just name recognition. You need serious chops.
Yeah.
And at I'm going to say something controversial, but I'm saying it aware that it's controversial, but they're not putting any of the Real Housewives into Sweeney Todd.
Right.
The Real Housewives can come and do Chicago. And I'm not saying it's easy, and I'm not saying the Real Housewives don't also have talent, because there's some that I'm sure are fantastic. But you can't swing somebody in for 6 weeks between, their TV engagements to do a show like that. You really have to get somebody who is the Olympic athlete to come and do it.
Yeah, I also think
my apologies to the Real Housewives.
Yeah, but something like Chicago is a bit of an anomaly anyway, because
Sure.
When it opened, I don't think people expect that the revival would still be on Broadway 20 years later, and because the first run of the show didn't do that well. And, most of the other shows that we've talked about that lasted a really long time on Broadway were not revivals. They were new shows when they opened, and then they stayed open for a really long time. So in some ways, Chicago is sort of the exception.
But they've done it with all this stunt casting. I think if they didn't have all the stunt casting that they do, I don't know that it would still have the staying power.
The thing is that now it's sort of a punchline that they do that, but they really revolutionized getting people in seats, which is really what it's about. And I will say that the stunt cast people that I have seen, and I put stunt cast in quotes because that too is a controversial term, but they actually can do it,
Oh, yeah.
And sometimes they're really good. And to sort of go back on what I said before, just because you're famous for one thing, like being a Bravo star, doesn't mean you don't have other talents too. And as somebody who's often seen as being known for one thing, I don't want to be diminished in all the things that you just haven't seen me do yet.
Right.
I heard the producers, and I can't give you a source, but I've read or seen or heard the producers talk about, there are people we turned down for this. It's not like anybody with a name can just be slapped on the marquee.
Sure.
It's not a cameo, they really have to be able to do it. But again, I don't think there's any argument that it is a simpler score than Sondheim.
Right.
Yeah, I think that it has, because there's always a space in New York for a show that people from out of town come, and when they think about seeing a show on Broadway, they think of whatever that show is. And for a long time, it was Cats, and then it was Phantom, and then when Wicked. And I think that Chicago has filled this space in the psyche of New York theater goers, people who come to New York, and they feel like, oh, well, this is part of the experience. You come to New York and you go and you see Chicago. That is part of it. Just like if you go to London, you go and see the Mousetrap. That's just a thing that you do. And I think that they have been very wise in the way that they have cast the show, because they do have such an interesting mix of people that they put into Chicago. And they also will put in very solid Broadway veterans as well to keep the show good. So, you're always mixing.
Anybody who can give you 6 weeks.
Yeah.
like right now, Chicago has Robin Herder, who's Tony nominated for Moulin Rouge, and which, by the way, is another example of one of the quote unquote newer Broadway long running shows. It's been around for 5 or 6 years. Who continues to bring in grade A, like A level talent, but the talent was never top. It was never the main draw of Moulin Rouge. Moulin Rouge, the property, was the main line.
Oh,
but
yes.
Robin Herder was nominated for a Tony. Then she went on to originate the female lead in A Beautiful Noise, the Neil Diamond musical. And now she's playing Velma Kelly in Chicago, where she got her, I think, her start, her Broadway debut as a chorus member.
Of course.
So,
That's
and then,
crazy.
and speaking of stunt casting that also is like grade A talent, Jinx Monsoon is about to come back to Chicago for
Yes.
20 performances only. And Chicago has like never sold as well as when Jinx was in before. And from what I hear, like that is a must-see performance, where the fact that this is a pop culture icon of the moment does not detract from the fact that she is also like a Tony winning quality performer who happens to be coming to the show 20 years in.
That's crazy.
Yeah. It's just, it's very smart the way they run that show. And, but I think, look, they got a good thing going. And again, different producers have different goals and dreams. And, but I do think that, it's just like actors. Some actors are very happy to get on a soap opera for 40 years and play the same role and be able to be home and have dinner with their kids and like be an actor, but have a nice life. Right. And then other actors are like, I can't, I have to do something completely different every time. And I always want a challenge and, whatever else. And I think it's probably the same thing with different producers. Like, some producers like, look, I love a good bread and butter show where the creativity, the fun is figuring out who we'll put in the show next. But I don't have to worry about, how are we, we're making so much money with Hugh Jackman, for instance, how can we keep this peak going, for one more year? And that just feels really stressful to me. And maybe it feels really stressful to the producers of Chicago. Like, we would rather have, the fun that we're having the way we're having it. And, but, everyone is going to be different in how they want to do things. But I would imagine there's also a lot of pressure with some of these theaters themselves too, that they want big shows with big stars that bring in big audiences, and they would rather turn over a new show every year under those circumstances because it keeps the theater itself making good money.
Yeah, that all kind of, even talking about money at all is not only something I don't know about, but something I choose to not know too much about, because when it comes down to it, knowing people are like, oh, how are the grosses doing for XYZ show? And I'm like, I don't know, because it doesn't help me to do my job better to know that. What helps me do my job is to not know and not care, not just not care, but not know whether or not something is likely to make a closing notice soon, because I just want to be there and love it. Like my position, I consider myself a professional audience member, a professional enthusiast. I'm specific, sometimes there are moments when the fourth wall is crossed, but for the most part, I'm in the house. I'm not making the show. And I don't want to see how the sausage is made. It's fun to peek backstage, but to have to go backstage and be like, oh, it really all is just accounting. Nothing could make me want to barf more than thinking about the accounting of something that I think of as magic. If I think of it as magic, I don't really want to know that it's a numbers game.
Right.
Now,
I just want to believe in the magic.
Of course. Now, speaking of magic, an off-Broadway show that is coming for a limited run this summer on Broadway is Cola Scola's Oh, Mary. And this has been...
I have tickets to the first preview.
But this has been one of these off-Broadway phenomena where every star on Earth has come to see this off-Broadway show. and what are the, because it is about Cola Scola plays Mary Todd Lincoln in the show, and Steven Spielberg came with Sally Field. And Steven Spielberg told Cola Scola, we made the wrong Lincoln movie after the show.
Oh, my God.
But people have been just absolutely raving about how fun this show is. And this only going to be a limited run on Broadway.
I've got my tickets.
12 weeks. So, but there's also, some risk in this because, sometimes things that are working really well in a smaller off-Broadway house don't play as well in a bigger Broadway theater. Sometimes it starts off-Broadway, Hamilton, and, with this kind of buzz and then becomes Hamilton.
Right.
But this is expected to just be a short run. So, are you're excited about the show, but you haven't seen the off-Broadway version yet?
Correct. I did not see the off-Broadway version, but when they announced for Broadway, I immediately bought a ticket to first preview, which is actually, as we're talking, tomorrow. So by the time people are hearing this, it will already be out there. I think that this is, I can't speak for the producers, but I love when something like this happens. To me, if I had my way, this is how every show would come to Broadway. Nothing is expected to go to Broadway. A friend of mine really kind of blew my mind and changed the way I think about the theater business when they said to me, Broadway is a marketplace. It's not an art form. It's a mall. It's like the Mall of America. It is not the only place to go to get great theater. In fact, it should be, I think, a place where already established great theater gets to go on display to reach, a specific audience. But there have been several examples of shows that had no plans to go to Broadway. Everything from like the revival of The Color Purple, which started in London, to the Deaf West revival of Spring Awakening, which started in LA, I think my guess is that Hamilton probably had early eyes on Broadway, even when it was being created at the public, but I don't know. But then something like Be More Chill, which, came to Broadway by way of having a popular cast recording that young audiences found after its out-of-town performance. And I think I like the idea that this totally out-of-nowhere production written by this downtown theater darling who, by their own admission, never thought they had any chance of being on Broadway because what they do is so avant-garde. It was just too good to ignore. And too good to ignore, I think, is what is that's what I'm interested in.
Yeah, that's exciting.
As opposed to how can we manipulate the dollars and cents to make money for the producers. It's like, this is art that people have to see, cost to be damned. And if we end up making money on it, great. But the art is being made for the sake of the art. And I think that's what I love so much about Lempicka as well. Like, yes, they wanted to come to Broadway, but that's another one that was in the works for like 16 years.
Wow.
It was just like they were working on it forever. And I will go to my grave singing the praises of Lempicka and how, and what a loss it is that show didn't get to stay. But I do think that a show like Cola Scola's, having not seen it yet, I can say I'm thrilled that it's on Broadway because it earned its way there by sake of the arts, not the accounting.
Yeah. But I also, this is what I agree with you. There's a limited number of Broadway houses, and so sometimes there can be a real fight for an empty theater. But I actually, we have seen that this has happened. That when sometimes a show will close earlier than expected, and there will be a short amount of time where a theater is available. And I would much rather have a situation like this, where you have something, really buzzy that's great off Broadway that people like, and put it in a Broadway house for 3 months in between when the next big show is going to come in, and give people something new and different to see. Ben Platt has this show that he's doing at the at the recently renovated and uplifted palace. And I think it's great to have these different experiences in these houses because it gives the audience different choices, which is good.
Agreed.
Totally. My only disappointment about Oh Mary is that they didn't put it in the Booth Theater.
Well,
which
yes.
is named after the brother of the guy who killed Lincoln.
People don't really realize this, but yes, the Booths, John Wilkes Booth, his brother, Edwin Booth, was a very famous New York actor, and the Booth Theater is named for him. But like this was an acting family, like the Barrymores, and yes, and I agree. It is a shame that there wasn't space.
They allow that. I can't believe that like populace allowed that, and people are like, "Oh, well, it wasn't a murderer; it was his brother." But still, like, can you imagine if we had a theater named after the brother of somebody who we all can agree was like is a totally evil, but they have the same name? Sorry, no, we're not naming a theater after your brother.
Yeah, it would be hilarious if there was like a murderous, like serial killer Hemsworth, and then it's like, and everyone's like, yeah, but. You know, Chris is so fun in comedies. Like, I imagine that these days it would be much harder to overlook, but apparently not back in the 1860s.
No shade, but I love that Chris Hemsworth is your example of like
well, I'm just saying,
the talent that deserves a theater named after.
Well, you know, in The Good Place, they had a running gag about the phantom Larry Hemsworth, the not existent Hemsworth brother.
Oh, right. Yeah.
And so, yes, just imagine that Larry Hemsworth is a serial killer. And, you know.
Or like, what if Osama bin Laden had a sister who was like a really excellent Broadway actress? And they were like, let's name the theater the Bin Laden Theater. It's not after Osama. It's his sister, who's a really good actor.
No.
You'd be like, no, we're not having a Bin Laden Theater.
No.
Yeah, it would be very, very awkward.
Sure would.
Anyway.
Oh, well.
Right.
Well, Laura,
it would have been very funny if the show about Mary Todd Lincoln had gone in there, but I
agree.
Alas.
Well, Laura, I am glad you have taken time out from your busy Broadway attending schedule to join us here and catch us up on you and all things Broadway.
Well, I would like to thank your listeners for chiming in on Instagram and being like, excuse me, when are you going to be back on the show? Because that's why we're doing this.
Yep, that's exactly why.
I am available whenever you want. You know, there are new shows, new season has already started.
All right, well, maybe we'll have to have you back in the near future to tell us all about the new shows.
I am at your disposal. You just let me know. I love you forever.
We love you.
We love you too. Our thanks to Laura Heywood for being with us. Broadway Girl NYC. You can follow her on Instagram, Facebook. Find her on YouTube, Broadway Girl NYC. And, of course, LauraHeywoodMedia.com is her website. You're listening to Derek and Romaine. Well, there you have it. The end of another perfect episode of Derek and Romaine. And if you want more great fun, go to DNRstudios.com and subscribe to get our show every day. And don't forget, for DNR Plus subscribers, you can use the DNR Cast app for iPhone, available now in the App Store.